Good morning. How's everybody? Like this winter weather that we're having so early? A little brisk time. Good to see you. Good to be with you today. I'm not hearing myself. Hello? Okay? Okay. Good to be back. Good to be here at Reunion. I've been here several times now, and it's just a real joy each time I come back and see some new people today. Good to see new folks, and good to see some of you older folks that I've met before. Brian asked me to come today to talk about one of the topics in marriage that he's dealing with, and I was watching some of the preaching that he's done online, and gosh, he's done a great job. Some good stuff there, and appreciate what he's already said. I don't know what else there is to say about it other than what he's already covered. He wanted me to talk about sex today, so I thought, well, okay. Let me ask you a question. Let me see a show of hands. How many of you are a part of or know of a perfect marriage? Okay, how many? Not very many hands up there. And the reason for that is because to have a perfect marriage, it takes perfect people, right? And there aren't many of those floating around, not many perfect folks among us. But what if I could show you today a perfect marriage? What if I could convey to you a perfect marriage? Would you like that? And would you like to benefit from that? Would you like to see what it's like and then model your marriage after that? That's our goal for today. I want to tell you about a perfect marriage. My wife is not here. I made her stay home. We went to church last night. I said, you need to stay home today. She's had a long week. So, plus when I preach on sex, I don't like for her to be in the audience. So, yeah, I'm teasing, but there is a couple I want to present to you today who can show us some great, great things about marriage. And actually, their material is in a book. You can pick up the book. You probably already have the book. It's called the Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs in some Bibles. Let me make Brian, I hope I can do this. I hope I can make it an assignment. I want to make 3 assignments this morning. One is that you read that 8-chapter book, the Song of Solomon. Read it with your spouse. Only 8 chapters. They're short. You can do that in a devotion time each evening. And come back next Sunday, you say, man, our marriage has turned around based upon what I'm reading here in the Song of Solomon. Some people call this book an allegory. They say, well, this is really merely about God and the church, or Jesus and his bride. And perhaps that is true, but also there's great application of just husband and wife. And we're going to take the literal approach today and just draw some principles from this marriage that we see in the Bible and see how we can benefit ourselves in that way. The gentleman in this passage and in this marriage is Solomon, and the wife is that of the Shulamite woman. He's referred to as the lover. She's called the beloved in that passage. But we're going to see them here in a little bit. Actually, the book of Song of Solomon tells us a lot about the entire relationship. It tells us about their courting days, their dating, their engagement, their wedding. It gives us some idea about the physical attraction they have to one another. Talks a lot about romance, intimacy. We learn about the character that is needed in a perfect marriage and how communication plays such a vital role as well. It seems then that there's a long period before we come to what we call in this passage the wedding itself. But I think a long dating period is important. There's a study done by Kansas State University, and they found that those who dated 2 or more years before marriage had more satisfaction in the marriage than those who were married without that much dating time. I'm not saying that's mandated, and I'm not saying that's the best, but they say that statistically, those who date longer potentially will have more satisfaction. And that makes good sense, just the common sense from that. Sometimes young people get married before they're fully matured, before they fully have blossomed. And then they get married, and then later on they do blossom, they do grow up, they do mature, and then they realize, gosh, this is not the person I thought I knew, not the person I thought I was marrying. Guys, statistics say that men don't mature until they're about 30 years of age. Now, some of you gals are saying, boy, let's hurry up, let's move along. Some people say it's 25 that a guy comes to maturity. Well, you just think about that. If he gets married at 18 and matures at 30, he's probably going to be a bit different than he was when he was 18 when he got married. So I think sometimes a longer engagement and is not all that bad, but it isn't mandatory. Some people date, they meet, date, and then get married shortly after that and have a great marriage. Not suggesting it can't be done. But here in the passage, these two seem to have had a long relationship before the actual marriage itself. But I want to draw 4 principles from this perfect marriage that I think will enhance our marriages as well. And the first thing I want to talk about is that of passion. Passion. Listen to this from chapter 3. All night long on my bed, I looked for the one my heart loves. I looked for him but did not find him. I will get up now and go about the city through its streets and squares. I will search for the one my heart loves. So I looked for him but did not find him. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. Have you seen the one my heart loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found the one my heart loves. I held him and would not let him go till I had brought him to my mother's house. See the passion there? It's throughout the book. Back in chapter 1, verse 15. Listen to this. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes are doves. She responds, how handsome you are, my love, and oh, how charming. And then in chapter 2, verse 16. My lover is mine, and I am his. He browses among the lilies until the day breaks and the shadows flee. Turn, my lover, and be like a gazelle or like a young stag on the rugged hills. In chapter 4, listen, they're talking to one another. He says, how beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn. Try that with your wife sometime, guys. But there's passion in this relationship. Now, passion will not build nor sustain a marriage because passion is an emotion. So it won't sustain the marriage. But a marriage that doesn't have passion is like listening to the rerun of last Saturday night's news report. There needs to be some passion in the marriage. Sometimes, you know, the guy or the gal will come home after work, long day at work, they change clothes, get their gym clothes on, they head to the gym or to the soccer field or to the bowling alley or to the workout center or whatever, and just really have a great time. 2 hours there, they're just perspiring and having a great time. They've lost a pound or two and just really are getting jazzed about what they're doing. And then they go home and the spouse says, hey, how's it going? Okay. What'd you do today? Nothing. What do you want to do tonight? Nothing. What are you going to do? Watch television. You see, what happens sometimes is we give our spouse the leftovers. We've invested in the workout. We've done everything on the gym floor. But we come home and we have nothing left to give. We need to invest. We need to invest to have passion in our marriage. The same creativity, the same passion, the same desire, the same compulsion that you put in your work should be put in your marriage. If some of us did as much, if we put as much passion in our work as we do our marriage, we probably wouldn't have a job. But we need to make sure that we don't give our spouse the leftovers. Let's have passion in our marriage as they did here in the text. And again, an assignment. First of all, to the guys. Guys, your assignment is between now and the end of the year. That's a lot of grace time. That's like 15 days or so. Your assignment is to do this. Call your wife during the day and say, sweetheart, I want you to get a bag packed. We're going to go away on a romantic excursion, secret romantic excursion. She said, well, what about the kids? Got it taken care of. You just be ready. I'll pick you up at 5:30. And so the guy gets home. He opens the door. She's still on the floor. She says, what's going on? We're going to go somewhere. We're going to take you away. You think that won't jazz her? You think she won't get excited about that? She really will. That will help build some passion into the relationship. Sometimes we have to rekindle the passion. We had it at one time, but we sometimes just need to rekindle it. One time I said to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I'm going to surprise you. We're going to take off tonight. You don't know where we're going, but I want you to be ready. And I had a couple that was going to go with us. And so she didn't know that. Good friends of ours were going, and she didn't know. So I said to her, I'm going to ask you a favor. She said, what's that? I said, would you please drive out of our compound here, blindfolded. A little strange. She said, okay. So we start out of our neighborhood, and here I got to thinking about it. The neighbors, what are they going to think? Here we are leaving, and here's my wife blindfolded. And so we drove along a little way, and she said, stop. I said, what's wrong? She said, I'm getting sick. So I said, all right, take the blindfold off. So we had to take the blindfold off, but still we did the trip. We picked up our friends and went away, had a marvelous time. Sometimes for us, an overnighter is just as good as a week or 2 weeks away. Just that little refreshment period. So guys, your assignment is that romantic getaway. Maybe it's an overnighter, maybe it's just a half a day, maybe it's longer. Whatever you can afford, whatever you can do with your schedule. And an assignment for the ladies as well, for the wives. Wives, how about this? How about when he comes home for dinner, he walks in and he sees candles burning on the table. And the good china is on the table. And the nice napkins are on the table. And he says, are your parents coming over? I say, no, this is for you. This is for you. You say, well, my husband doesn't notice things like that. Yep, he does. He notices. So let's put some jazz. Let's put some sparkle. Let's rekindle the passion in our marriage. We have a good friend, two good friends actually. I was at a high school graduation reunion about 2.5 years ago. And a couple of my friends were at the table with us. We came to the end of the evening, and I said to this gal who had been divorced for about 25 years, I said to her, you need to get in touch with this guy. This guy his wife had died many years ago, so they're both single. Both of them passionately loved the Lord. They had a lot in common. And I said to her, I said, you need to get in touch with him. She said, why is that? Is he lonely? I said, well, I don't know that he's lonely, but you have so much in common. I just think you guys ought to get together. She said, okay, and that's all there was to it. But he picked up on it, and he called her the next week. He said, hey, I'm coming over. This is not a visit. This is our first official date. He went over. She went over to visit him. He came back and visited her and proposed to her. 5 months after the high school reunion, I went down to Kentucky and helped perform their wedding ceremony. But Martha and I, my wife and I, met them in a restaurant down in Kentucky. And I had never seen anything quite like it, because here we were sitting in the restaurant, and she's looking at him, he's looking at her. Martha and I are sitting there trying to, twiddle our thumbs, whatever. And he said to her, he said, Flora, that dress is absolutely stunning. You make that dress. You're just beautiful in that dress. She looked at him, she said, Lanny was his name. He said, Lanny, you are the most handsome guy that God has ever made. And he says to her, you just don't know the joy that you bring to me. She says to him, I mean to tell you, you excel all of the guys in our graduating class, even including Brammer, kind of a thing. So here they are just doing all this mooning stuff. My wife and I are just gazing out the window, What's going on here? But, when you go in a restaurant, you see two people who are just gazing at one another, oblivious to the food and all that's going on. You say, hey, they must be dating. You find this couple there, they've already eaten their food, they're just sitting there looking around. You say, gosh, they've been married a while. Sometimes it works that way. We need to put the passion in our marriage. I think the greatest example of that is contained in Ephesians chapter 5. Let me read a familiar passage. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. Do you see the passion there? This is how the Lord loves the church. He passionately loves the church, so much that he's willing to die for the church. When we read that passage, some people get a little upset about the submission role of the wife. Wives, submit to your husbands. But you know what? Guys, when you love your wife as Christ loved the church, that word submit means that she will admire, respect, and appreciate you. A woman will admire you, appreciate you, and respect you when she knows that you are the only person on the planet who would be willing to die for her. So we need to love with that kind of a passion, that kind of intention, showing our spouse that if necessary, I would lay down my life for you. I'll tell you, when you do that, a woman will do whatever the submission means in the text. And as she submits, he loves more, and as he loves more, she submits more. And guys, let me just clue you in. Your husband needs, above all else from you, he needs your admiration. Guys are craving for admiration and for respect and for attention. And you're the only person who can legitimately meet that need. So hear me out when I tell you that one of his greatest needs from you is that you respect him. I don't care what he does in the marketplace. I don't care what kind of a job he has, what his status might be out in the community. But if he doesn't have the respect of his wife, he's a whipped puppy. He's just a whipped dog. So do that. Submit to him, respect him, admire him, appreciate him, build him up, and then he will love you as Jesus loved the church. One time my wife said to me, you know, I'd like to have a hardwood floor in our kitchen. We had an old ugly linoleum on the kitchen floor, and I said, well, let's just put one down. And who are we going to get to do that? I said, well, I'm going to do that. Okay, so here I am. If you know anything about carpentry, I didn't have a T-square. I didn't have a level, didn't have a measure. I didn't have anything. I had a screwdriver, I think, maybe, hammer and things of that sort. But anyway, I bought the floor. So I go in. I don't have anything to measure it off with. I just sight in the first plank. I say, I'll put it right here. So I nail it down, and I started coming from that. Lo and behold, if I knew now if I'd known then what I know now, I never would have started. What a crazy thing to do, not knowing a thing about what you're doing. But you know, it came out all right. It came out all right. Got to the end, there was a pretty big gap there. I just put a piece of molding over that, and nobody ever knew. But my wife, she thought I had hung the moon. She started telling people, you won't believe what Howard done. I'd be walking through the house, she'd be on the phone, you won't believe, Howard, what he did. And I'd just stop around the corner, you know. Don't let her know it, but I'm listening. What'd she say? I tell you, guys thrive on that. Quote him. Tell others how great he is. Build him up. Passion can be rekindled in that relationship. Let me mention another thing that's in this text. She says down there in verse 6, who is this coming up from the desert like a column of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and incense, made from the spices of the merchants? And then she says, look, it is Solomon's carriage, escorted by 60 warriors, the nobles of Israel. And all of them are wearing the sword, all experienced in battle. Get the picture here if you can. Let me draw you a picture. Let's suppose we get a center aisle here, and this is a cathedral where we're going to have a wedding ceremony, okay? Now watch what happens here. Here comes a United States Marine dressed in his military blue, and he has a sword, and he stands with that sword extended right at attention, just perfectly still. All right, you got a guy next to him, another Marine. You got 30 of these guys going out this way, and they're each holding the sword. Now watch over here. We got 30 other guys, 30 more Marines. They've got a sword, and it's held up here. And the tip of his sword is touching the tip of the sword of the guy across from him. And do you see that canopy that's been formed there? Now watch as the bride comes in. She comes down and she walks through that canopy. The groom is saying something to her. He's saying, protection. Protection. She can walk through that canopy without any concern about what's going on, without any distraction, because there is protection as she comes down. And sometimes we need to think in those terms. We need to have one another's back. We need to protect one another. We need to make a safe environment in which we live. You know, when we have a wedding ceremony, some of the things that we do are because of tradition, and some of the things we do are based upon truth. But there are a lot of traditions we do at weddings, and we do them, but we don't know why we do them. For example, why do we put the ring on this particular finger? The ring finger, we call it. It's because the Greeks had a thought one time that there was an artery that ran directly from the heart down to that particular finger. Therefore, they put the ring on that finger. Another thing that we do in wedding ceremonies that we perhaps don't know why we do it. If you look at a wedding, you see all these attendants up here, and along with the groom, there are the groomsmen, and they're all dressed the same way. Why is that? We say, well, Joseph Bank had another sale, 3 for nothing, or whatever he's selling them for now. But anyway, you've got these guys, they're all dressed alike, just sharp and handsome, but they all look alike. The reason for that, traditionally at least, is that many years ago, the guy who was getting married, the groom, would sometimes get this gal from another guy who wasn't happy about her leaving him. And he had vowed and determined that the day would come when he would get even with this fellow for taking his girlfriend. And so when the wedding time comes, there's a possibility that this former lover is going to come out and attack this guy who's marrying this girl. And so his friends say, I'll tell you what let's do. Let's all dress alike so that when this guy shows up at the wedding and he starts after the groom, we'll all flee and we'll be dressed like the groom. He won't know which one the groom is and he won't know which way to go, and our guy will be safe. And so people dressed alike for that reason, tradition says. So they were helping their buddy. They were keeping his back, watching his back, protecting him. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but it makes a good story, doesn't it? But there is a need for protection. The people standing up with you, as we say, like the groomsmen and the bridesmaids, what they're doing is they're standing there as a protection for you. They're saying, you know, we're going to support you. You're making some vows, and we're going to stand by you in those vows. And also, we're going to hold you accountable for what you're saying. We're your witnesses. We have witnessed the vows that you've made. We're going to hold you accountable. So they're not there just for numbers. They're there for a reason. And they're there for protecting. And the groom is probably the primary protector in the relationship. And I don't mean to be chauvinistic, but it would seem to me that Peter's talking about that when he says the husband should treat his wife with respect as the weaker vessel. Now, he's not saying that she can't run a mini marathon better than he can. He's not saying that she can't do a job better than he can. But he is saying that there is something in the marriage that one person tends to be the weaker vessel. And he's talking there about she's dainty, she's tender, she's priceless. And so he says that husbands should treat their wives with respect as the weaker vessel. And I think women are attracted to men of strength, guys who have value, who have strength in their convictions, and provide protection as a result of that. But notice also there's provision down in verse 9. Verse 9 of the passage. King Solomon made for himself the carriage. He made it of wood from Lebanon. Its posts he made of silver. Its base of gold. Its seat was upholstered with purple. Its interior lovingly inlaid. So the point here that we're making is the fact that there's somebody who's able to provide for this wedding and for the family, for the wife and the husband in the situation. You know, we've all heard of the romantic couple that says, well, we have no money, but we'll just live on love. Two can live as cheaply as one. Well, perhaps that's true, but it's really risky to get married and be highly suspect or vulnerable to financial issues. Money can bring some real tensions in the marriage relationship. So we need to have some kind of a provision. There needs to be somebody who's providing for the relationship, for the family. The Bible says if a man doesn't provide for those of his own household, then he's worse than an infidel. So there needs to be this provision. And husbands, I think, in many cases have to take that primary role. As the wife is perhaps home with the children, rearing the kids, he needs to be the one who's primarily responsible for that financial piece. You don't have to be rich to be married, but financial problems can cause major stressing in a relationship. So we need to be careful about that and need to budget properly and wisely as we grow in the relationship. Let me mention a final thing. I think Brian talked about this, but let me just add the importance of parental participation. A major problem in marriages today has to do with parents or the in-laws. Parents and in-laws can make or break a young marriage, and it's very important the role that they play. In verse 11, Solomon's mother approved of this relationship, and she gave her blessing. She put the crown upon her son, a sign to the general public that we affirm this relationship. We approve of what's going on here today. Of course, in our marriages today, a father will give away the bride, we call it, and he's doing that on behalf of the wife. But they're giving her away, and that's a tradition, but it has more long-lasting meaning than just a tradition. It's a time when the parents are saying, we approve of what's going on. we agree with what is taking place here. Sometimes young couples say, well, it's just the two of us. We don't really care what other people think. We're in love. We're going to get married. That can be a very foolish thing, a very foolish decision, because parents have insight that sometimes the young couple do not have. For example, a father of a young man knows things about men and women that the young son of his doesn't yet have the knowledge of. And so it's helpful for us to listen to the wisdom of those who are a little older. Sometimes young couples say, well, it's just the two of us, babe, and we'll get along regardless of what others think. The parents have said, you know, this is not a good deal. We don't think you should do this. You're too young. It's not the time. But we go right ahead and can create some real difficulty. So while parents don't make the decision there as to who we marry and when we marry, we need to be open to their counsel and to their wisdom. Because when you get married, you marry more than one person. You marry his family or her family. You marry some childhood memories, some experiences they've had as a kid. You marry the values and the beliefs that they've had in their families that they're bringing with them. And so we need to realize that it's going to be a bigger deal than just two people. Happiness oftentimes runs in families, as does unhappiness and divorce sometimes run in families. You can break the pattern. You don't have to go through the same pattern that your parents went through or his parents went through or her parents. But sometimes we bring with us those difficulties from the past as well as those good things from the past. Happiness runs in families. Unhappiness sometimes also runs in families. But relationship with parents do change once we get married. We move from them being an authority figure to a counselor. My oldest son, Craig, was married, and just a few weeks after that, there was something that came up, and I don't know what it was even, but I went to him and I said, Craig, let me just point out something to you here. And for the first time in his life, he looked at me and he said, Dad, that won't be necessary. He didn't say, Dad, shut up, or Dad, it's none of your business, but that's the message I got, because I was interfering in a place where I didn't have any business. But then on occasion, he would call me and say, Dad, here's a situation. I want to get your counsel on this thing. And it really swells the heart of a dad when a son will ask for his counsel. And there came the time when I would call him and say, Craig, I want to know what you think about this. So I'm bringing him into my world, and he's bringing me into his world. But it's a different relationship than it was. It's different than when Dad said, hey, son, I want you to do this, or daughter, I want you to do that. But now they become counselors to us. But if you want to do something really wise, include your parents in the relationship. And call them in. Say, hey, Mom and Dad, we want to come over and talk to you about something. We've got something we want to talk about, need your counsel. And that will help bond that relationship that you have with them. Sometimes it's very difficult for parents to give up a child, especially I find it difficult for a dad to give away a daughter to his to-be son-in-law. You know, a lot of times I have a perspective, the preacher has a perspective in a wedding that others don't have. For example, we're standing down the front. Here's the groom, here's the best man and the groomsmen and so forth. And here comes the bride down the aisle. And the father sometimes just can't handle it. He just breaks down. He starts crying as he's bringing his daughter down the aisle, which is legit. That's all right. Show your emotion. So he's crying. He's coming down. But I know why he's crying, because I've seen this gorilla over here that he walks down the aisle and he looks down the front. Here's this guy down here just grinning like a big gorilla, you know. And he's going to give his daughter to that guy. You can understand why he cries, can't you, you know? But sometimes we need to appreciate the fact that it can be difficult to give a child away like that in marriage. But the Bible says that for the cause of marriage, a husband will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they two shall become one. So there comes a time when we leave, a time when we cleave. That's why parents begin to pray for the spouse of their child before the child is born. Some of you are praying already for your kids to have the right spouse, right? That's very normal, very good, and very wholesome, because you have so much invested. So we can't just think, well, it's none of my dad's business, none of my mom's business. I'll marry who I want and do what I want. We need to be a participant with them in that as much as we can. Well, let me close with this little story. I've used this at weddings, and it's a cute little story, but it surely has a great deal of truth. A little boy one time was coming home from church, and his dad said, well, what did you learn today? He said, well, Dad, in Sunday school, said what we did today was we studied the life of Jesus, and we found out that he stopped at a little village in Cana of Galilee, and he performed his first miracle. And Dad said, well, what did he do? He said, well, Dad, he changed water into wine. It's just a marvelous thing. And Dad said, well, son, that's a great lesson, a great story, but what did you get out of that? What did you learn from that? He said, well, Dad, what I learned was if you're going to have a wedding, you better make sure that Jesus is there. And so true it is. We need to make sure that our marriage is built on spiritual foundation, upon solid rock. And of course, that is the Lord Jesus Christ, who loved the church so much that he was willing to die for it. So marriage, there's no perfect marriage. And you don't need to be disillusioned if yours is not perfect. But at the same time, I think we need to be making sure that our marriage is growing. Our relationship is deeper today than it was last year. And we're moving forward, and we're trusting God to build into our relationship everything that is needed to make us as perfect as we possibly can have it. And God will honor that. Marriage is a great thing. It's God's greatest human relationship. And we can make or break it based upon how we respond to Him and to His Word. So make sure that not only at the wedding ceremony, but throughout the marriage, make sure that Jesus is present.